Welcome to Crypto Sapiens, a show that hosts lively discussions with innovative Web3 builders to help you learn about decentralized money systems, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, and DeFi. The podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and it is not financial advice. Crypto Sapiens is presented in partnership with GenomesDAO, a movement for pioneers seeking freedom from the limitations of the traditional financial system. GenomesDAO will help the world go bankless by creating user-friendly on-ramps for people to discover decentralized financial technologies through education, media, and culture. GM, everyone. We are back with another episode of Crypto Sapiens. Today, we are talking to Aldo de Pape and GenomesDAO Intern, co-founder and contributor of GenomesDAO, respectively, to learn about the DNA databank that puts you back in control of your genome. They seek to address privacy, security, and ownership concerns of DNA testing and sharing by building the world's largest user-owned genetic databank and secure the future of personalized medicine. We discuss the privacy risks of using direct-to-consumer genetics companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe, and why we should be mindful of securing our genomic data. So let's get started. So without further ado, let's get started on some introductions. Today, we are talking to GenomesDAO, and we have here today with us Aldo, who is the co-founder and CEO of the project, and GenomesDAO, who is the intern of the project. Let's start with an introduction to you, Aldo, and as brief and as much as you want to share, without doxing yourself, right? I mean, like your home address and all that fun stuff. And then we'll follow that with GenomesDAO, and we'll go from there in terms of like how that eventually got us to founding and working on GenomesDAO.
So my name's Aldo de Pape. As I said before, co-founder and CEO of Genomes.io. I got into Genomes while working with Mark Hanno, who sadly couldn't be with us today. Mark is a geneticist who has a PhD in stem cell biology from Imperial College. And he started back in 2011 a company called Figshare. There was a big investor interested in Figshare, and basically it was a venture capital fund. I worked for that venture capital fund and was paired up with Mark to grow his company. I love doing that, and I did it with lots of passion and excitement for 3 years, but then got a little something called founder's envy, and I really wanted to start my own venture. So I did that in 2014 and started an edtech company called Teach Pitch. And what that company is trying to do is trying to close the digital skills gap, specifically in education. It's very focused on peer-to-peer learning, specifically for teachers. So completely different ballgame. Mark and I, however, stayed in touch. We became good friends and met very often. And we were talking a lot about the idea for genomes, not of course in the version that it is today, but already talking about the value of DNA data back in 2014. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of how this journey started and who I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That definitely gives us a good picture and concise enough, I think. GenomesDAO Intern.
Yeah. So hello, everyone. Thanks for having us today. I guess, so my position is basically the position inspired by, what you've seen on like crypto Twitter, like Sushi Intern, and then there's like CMS Intern, Delphi Intern, there's like Olympus Intern, there might be Binance Intern now. So it's kind of that meme, right? So that's kind of what my position is. Yeah, I guess a little bit of background on me without doxing myself, because it's fun to be in on. Recently kind of graduated. My background's in biomedical engineering. I've worked in a few different labs, but I've spent some time in pharmacogenomics. And that's kind of why I got interested in this project when I found out about it. And then as soon as I found out about it, I dug deeper, and then I hopped on board because I thought it had a lot of potential to kind of change the status quo.
Great. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that intern meme. And I think I want to recognize something that one of our community members said as we were preparing for the show is, I think now with the way DAOs work and allow people to contribute, we all are kind of interns to some degree when we get started, right? We're learning, we start contributing, and then as we add value or bring value to these projects, there are incentives that that we're able to gain from our contributions. So there's value, to everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing I'd like to add is that, I was thinking of maybe changing my name from intern because I've been doing this for maybe a month and a half now. But I think I'm going to keep it for some symbolism, right? It's symbolic because in a DAO, you don't necessarily need a title to be a leader. And I think that's an important takeaway. So I think I'll keep the intern title as long as I can because I think it's funny. But no, the point still stands. Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly. I think so. In fact, I think currently, as DAOs exist, there's still a lot of experimentation and a lot of learning that happens on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's all part of the experimentation as we move forward in Web3. So in terms of GenomesDAO, can you give us a brief introduction to what it is, what inspired it, and how it works?
So going back to 2014, where Mark and I basically started a conversation about DNA data and the value of DNA data. So we were, through the work that we did with Figshare, we were dealing a lot with data, specifically research data generated by lots of research institutions and academic organizations. So loads of researchers who were working with loads of data, so to say. And among others, we also came across DNA data. So people who were very keen on doing their research and who really were going to the other end of research. They were talking about the value of DNA data. And at some point, there was also a professor who uploaded the genomic sequence of one of his children to one of the tools we were working with. And that basically catalyzed in our thinking something that we were like, okay, we're all in favor of sharing data, and we're all looking at, the value that data can have for the progression of science and for technology. But surely sharing someone else's genomic data might be one bridge too far. And, one of the reasons for that thinking, which now in 2021 proved to be correct, was that there's an enormous value to your genome. So we all have a genome. We all have our DNA data. It's a unique sequence that we all have, a genomic sequence. Basically, that is the blueprint to who you are. And the beauty of it is that for each and every one of us, for every human being on this planet, we have a different sequence. So there's no such thing as two of the same sequences. And that is something very profound and something we need to be very aware of, because of its uniqueness, it also has tremendous value. Now, there are just a little bit of genomic history. In 2001, the first attempt was undertaken to sequence a genome in a very big laboratory. The cost for doing that was, I believe, over $5 billion just to sequence one genome. The cost of that today is a little over $500. And already the leaders in the market have announced that the cost will come down in the next few years from $500 to $100. And maybe after that point, it will be completely for free. So this is a clear indication that the sequencers, the laboratories who do the sequencing, that's not really where in a sustainable sense of the word, the money will be made. But the value is in the data. And don't take our word for it. You can also look at something that we would like to call direct-to-consumer genetic companies. And you might have heard of them. They're companies called like 23andMe. I think is the most infamous example. But you also have Ancestry.com. So what these companies do is they also sequence your genomic data, and then in return for you paying them to do that, around $150 approximately, on a Christmas sale, you will get in return a nice little gadgety ancestry report. So it's something that tells you where your ancestors are from. That they might be from from wherever. So in my case, from Ireland. So my father had his 23andMe done, and he said, "Oh, did you know that 5 generations ago we were in Ireland?" So it's something like that. But it's a gadget, right? It's something nice to know, is something that you're interested in. The real business model for these companies is not giving you your report and your $150. The real business model for these companies is that they cross-sell your data to pharmaceutical companies. And so we have blogged about this. So and I'm happy we can dig it up and share it here as well. Whereby from 2012 to today, we've mapped out all the kind of big deals that were done by these companies by cross-selling your data to pharmaceutical companies and research organizations. Now, what we think is wrong in this formula is, first and foremost, this wasn't really done with the full consent of the person who paid for the original gadgety report. And by full consent, I mean, yes, you might have agreed to the terms and conditions, the 1,000 paragraphs in terms and conditions that stipulates, okay, once this is done, you've waived the right over your genome, and we can do whatever we want to do with it. But we basically mean that there's no real transparency as to what will happen with the data. So first of all, we would like to say you might have not proactively consented to that. Second of all, once the data is gone, you have absolutely no insight on what happens to the data. So, it's all a big question. Do they cross-sell it? What do they do with the database that holds your most valuable data, the most valuable data you will ever have? And then third of all, they make money of selling your data. So to give you an example, and a lot of money, right? So to give you an example, in 2018, 23andMe closed the deal with GlaxoSmithKline, selling 5 million of your exomes, which is, genomic sequences. I'll get to the difference later, for $300 million. So the value that these companies accumulate and the value that they gain by cross-selling your data, it's not based on kind of the most sincerest form of consent. It's not authentic. And, that's something that's the frustration that we're built upon. And we put our money where our mouth is, and built basically a decentralized version of 23andMe. You can still do all the things like the gadgety ancestry report or any type of other report that we could talk about later. So you can still get to know a lot about you and your health and whatever ties in with your genomic data. But also your data is safe in a vault that only you can access. So, and you are the only person who has full control over your genomic sequence, and nothing happens with that data unless you proactively approve it.
So you brought up a lot of, I think, interesting points here that we should unpack. But, really I do want to touch on something here that you just mentioned now, which is the differences between, GenomesDAO and some of these other maybe more recognizable names in the genetic sequencing, like 23andMe and Ancestry.com. So what is the difference in terms of how this data is collected, how this data is, held in vaults and secured?
Yeah. So I guess I'll take a stab at that. I guess the first thing that's important to understand the differences between GenomesDAO and like a 23andMe and Ancestry is something that Aldo mentioned was for $150, right? They give you that cute little ancestry report. They're sequencing something called your exome, right? And your exome is about 1% to 2% of your genome. It's not the whole genome. What we're doing at GenomesDAO is doing something called whole genome sequencing. So it's your entire genome, right? So that's the first kind of difference between kind of us and them. The second thing is that,
Wait, so to
sorry,
clarify, does
yeah.
that mean that that is more complete than the sequencing with GenomesDAO than anyone else?
Yes. So we're doing with our partners, right? The partner we're currently working with is Nebula because they have a very strong privacy focus, right? And that's kind of the point of this DAO. But Nebula, through our partnership with Nebula, we're doing whole genome sequencing. So meaning you get your entire genome sequenced. So if you would have done a 23andMe or Ancestry, you'd have only gotten your exome sequenced. If you have gotten those direct to consumer genomic tests before. So that's kind of the first difference. The second difference is that, as Aldo mentioned, right, as soon as you go online, you say, oh, I want to get a 23andMe test or an Ancestry test, right? And then they'll send you the kits, and then they'll either do a cheek swab or you'll put your saliva in a test tube. They'll send that back to their labs, and then at their labs, they'll sequence your exome, right, from that genetic sample, and then they'll give you some report. Now, the thing is that after they do that, what happens to the data then, right? Well, and what they're doing, what Aldo very clearly mentioned was they're taking your genetic information and then they're selling it to other people. And then sometimes, in some cases, in the case of Ancestry, they're selling it for a hell of a lot of money. So Blackstone, right, the suits on Wall Street, I don't think they give a damn like if your grandfather's Polish, right? They don't care about that. They care about what that.
Yeah, that's the gamification of their real product, right?
Exactly, 100%. Like if you've gotten one of these tests before, you quite literally rugged yourself. You paid someone to give your personal information to someone else for even more money.
One of the most personal informations, because I know we talk about like password management, even like key management for crypto. We even talk about biometric data, right? But like genomic data, that's like the root of it all. Like you can change your passwords. Sure, you can start using a new wallet, but as you start getting into biometric and genetic data, like these are things that you cannot replace. So super important to be mindful of the value, both the value to yourself, right? Not just the value of what that means for some other market or company, but what that means in terms of like what that means to you just generally in protecting that information, but also how you can protect that, right? And the fact that you can't change that. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Absolutely. And the other thing too, right? I guess I'll touch on two things. The first thing is that for GenomesDAO, what we're basically doing is allowing self-custody of your genome. So as soon as you go through us, right, and you get your whole genome sequenced, that gets put in one of these AMD SEV vaults, which these are like the bleeding edge of like encryption. They're about as close to like a Ledger and MetaMask wallet as you can get with the current technology. And then GenomesDAO doesn't have access to your vault. Like if for some reason like Blackstone or some private equity company and said, oh, we need to buy all the governance tokens for GenomesDAO and let's get all the information from, the DAO, we actually don't have access to your genome, right? Only you do. And if you want someone to query it, you have to approve that. And that's what's stored on the blockchain, the auditable record of the opening and closing of these vaults. But we'll get into that later. And the other thing I just wanted to add is that, right now people, they kind of give this information away like freely. They're like, oh, like, and I'm kind of guilty of this too, because when I worked in pharmacogenomics, I was like, oh, mom, like, here, I got you an Ancestry test. This was like long before, right? Long before GenomesDAO, and I even thought of this. And I like, in hindsight, I was like, wow, like that was such a stupid decision. Like now Ancestry has my mom's, exome. And we're just very, very like, ooh, that's like cute and colorful. It's gamified, as you mentioned, right? It's gamified. Let me find something, let me find where my ancestors are from. But you'll probably already know that. And the one other thing I wanted to add, and like, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but as we move into as we transition into Web3, I think people need to understand that your genome, as you mentioned, is super, super important. And one example I give is if like Mark Zuckerberg's like, hey, we want, let's combine your behavioral data, right? So if anyone watched a couple weeks ago on 60 Minutes, the author of the book Sapiens came on, and he mentioned that these Web2 companies, Instagram, Facebook, they know more about you than you know about yourself. Like just how you're interacting on their platform, they can like tell what your sexual orientation is even before maybe you can, which is scary. And if they can do that, imagine what else they know about you. And what gets even scarier is if you combine that genomic information with your behavioral data. And then they could easily say, oh, let's, Mark Zuckerberg could easily say, hey guys, like Q1, let's do really, really well for Q1. Let's increase revenue. Find every single person, in our genomic data set that is predisposed to like anxiety, and then curate them content that will make them super, super anxious. And then as soon as we've determined they've become anxious based on how they're interacting on the platform, let's sell them an anti-anxiety drug. Like this is what like these dystopian, movies are made of. And as we're moving to Web3, the whole point of Web3 is, you own your data, right? You own your data. So I'll stop there. But
yeah, I actually wanted to touch on something you brought up. So one of the things you mentioned was, when you were in pharmacogenetics, I think it was called. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I probably am. You got a ancestry kit for your mom, right? I think that we should recognize too that there are social pressures that maybe sometimes will have us do something that maybe that's not what we really wanted to do, but other people are doing it. So then we end up deciding to do it too. And of course, game mechanics don't help that matter, right? Because they really just maybe force us to do something without fully considering the repercussions. So as an example, I remember a lot of my friends were jumping onto like Facebook and Instagram. And while I was always very mindful of my digital footprint, I just fell into that rabbit hole because I was like, oh, my family is there. I want to be able to communicate with them. Or I have friends who are there who I haven't been able to talk to in a long time. But, while the front end is nice and I did have access to friends and family that I didn't before on a regular basis, the back end is a little bit, a little darker than that, isn't it? Because there is that data harvesting and monetization and profiling even that happens that then ends up, doing more harm than good for ourselves. So to your point, I think of, these kits like Ancestry and 23andMe, is that and I do remember there was a craze for a long time where that was the gift to give for the holidays. And so there were, folks who were just signing up. Fortunately, I didn't. But I definitely felt like I should have because I felt like I was missing out on something. Like my friends and maybe some of my family members were doing it. And I was like, oh, like I really should try that because I want to get more information about myself. But, knowing now and maybe using other, companies as an example, other institutions as an example of what they do with that data, I'm kind of glad that I didn't because that, was information that I would have freely been giving up. And then, allowing, I guess, for some of the scenarios to play out like Genome's intern just explained.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, Humpty, and you sound like a conscious user of of loads of platforms. You were already kind of looking at your digital footprint maybe long before others were were doing that. Um, I think there are two sides here, right? There are two sides of the coin. Basically, there's and some people they make the trade off. Some people say I'm actually happy for this platform to use my data in exchange for the communication and the happiness that it gives me. And I don't mind if I get if I when I accept the cookies I get customized ads and whatever more. Um, uh, Kind of what we do see here that every step of the way it needs to be a conscious process. So you can sign off on whether you want this or not. right? And I think this is also very much what Facebook, currently known as Meta, is of course doing. They're trying to showcase to you that they're being very transparent with the use of your data if and when they're using it. The problem that we see is that it's still based on a trust relationship. It's still based on the assumption that you as a user trust Mark Zuckerberg and team that they will do the right thing with your data, and that once you basically say, I don't want you to do that anymore, that they will obey and stop doing that. Now, this trust is all nice and lovely, but what indeed happens, like in the case of Ancestry.com, when this company gets taken over for $4.7 billion, and the trust contract that you originally had with, Ancestry.com or whichever tool is thrown out of the window because there's a new chief in town, and that company says, we're going to do it all different, and we're going to monetize on your data. And that is the scary part, right? So it's not necessarily, we don't mean to say that from the outset these Web 2.0 social platforms are in it to get your data and kind of want to make money and harass you where you don't want to be harassed or whatever. That's one bridge too far. But we are indeed saying that the relationship is based on a trust, and your data is in kind of a central database which you have no control over. And that central database, if the company is successful, will get sold, or parts of it will get sold and will be used for other tools. And the same goes for your genomic data, right? The other comment I wanted to make in terms of sequencing your genome and selling your genome is we're looking at kind of a market that very quickly evolved, is very, very valuable. But as I said in the beginning, the first genome was sequenced in 2001, right? That's 20 years ago. And now, so a lot has happened in 20 years. Science and technology has evolved very, very, very quickly on this level. So the reason why lots of people waived their genomic data is because there was no alternative. They just didn't know any better. This was the only option for them. And it was a fun option, right? These companies, 23andMe, they also are very successful in their marketing and advertising because they work with, the like Good Morning America kind of shows whereby, someone finds someone who was adopted finds their real biological parents because of a database, or they find their long lost twin sister through the database. So there are lots of these emotional stories that come out because you basically see, hey, this was because of a DNA match. A lot of people went with it because there was nothing else. There was just no other option. And also how research is done. So it's not only in the commercial market, but also researchers, and we've spoken to researchers, they previously were also used to getting the whole sequence and then just playing around with that sequence until they were bored of it, right? So they, in the way they did their research in their laboratories, that also wasn't really kind of with, having your privacy and your security in mind. It's just because that was the way they were used to doing it, right? So this is all kind of, we would like to basically say that we're kind of the next step, and we would like to think ourselves as a Web 3.0 solution that has this decentralization and that has, in mind, and really has as a focus for you as the individual, for you as the one who has that genome, for you to stay in control, and that nothing happens with the data without you having a say in that.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe now's a good time to talk about, I guess, the method by which someone could get started using GenomesDAO, to contribute data, to store and secure that, and to access that, and ways to actually leverage that data.
So the way we're kind of doing it right now is if you wanted to, so we're having our NFT sale, and that's going to be around mid-January. And then for each NFT, it's going to be like one of the profile picture ones, but for each NFT, you'll get one of these you redeem that for a whole genome sequencing kit from our partner Nebula, right? And then what happens is this kit, it'll be sent to where you want it to be sent, because we're also conscious, right? A lot of people in crypto, they respect their privacy, including like, their home address and things like that. So we're very cognizant of, if we need to get you a kit, we can do it in a very secure and anonymous way. So maybe sending it to your PO box, or maybe sending it, we'll be having like a landing page that kind of describes, if you really want to go down the super private route, to get you the kit. But basically, we'll get you the kit, and then that kit gets sent to Nebula. They'll sequence your whole genome, and then after that sequence, they'll upload it to this AMD SAV vault. And this vault is something that only you have control over, with the 12-word seed phrase, similar to your, MetaMask. And then from there, once it's in the vault, if third parties want to query it, right? Say you fall into, a certain demographic, or you have a very, say specifically you have like a rare disease, right? And researchers being able to query parts of your genome, would benefit science. It would also be worth a lot for them to sequence it. They have the ability to do it, but in a safe and private way, where you have the ability to consent to every query into your vault. So anytime anyone wants to, open the vault or see a tiny part of your genome and see what it says, you have the ability to control that. And then for that, you would make passive income for that query. So like it would be like, say Pfizer's like, okay, we need, individuals that are Caucasian males, age 50 to 60 in the US, that have, diabetes or something. We'd like to look at this small part of your genome, and we'll be willing to give you $100. Do you accept? And then you can either accept it, and then you would get paid in our gene token, or you can reject it and say, you know what, no, I don't want to do it. And that's fine too. But the point is that you retain full custody of your genome, right? And I think this idea is very important because, as Aldo mentioned, the cost of whole genome sequencing has gone down from like $1 billion to now it's $500, and it's going down by magnitudes each year. And there's going to be a point where there's going to be zero cost whole genome sequencing, where it'll actually cost more money for you to get treated without having your genome rather than having it, right? Because the insights from your genome will help your doctor. And then you have to think, when everyone does have their genome in their pocket, what type of platform would you want to use? Would you want it to be in the form of a DAO? Or would you want it to be in the form of, a VC-controlled entity or private equity entity where you don't have control over that, right? So we're hedging that as the world transitions to Web3, as people, have NFTs in their wallets, they have a crypto wallet, they have Coinbase and, Gemini and all these, things on their phone, MetaMask on their phone, you're also going to have your genome on your phone. And if you want to monetize it in a safe and private way, you can. But if you don't, and you just want to discuss your genome with, your genetic counselor or your doctor, that's perfectly fine too. And I'll give you like one last example, and then I'll kind of stop there. So I worked in pharmacogenomics, and the question you always get asked is like, hey, like, why would I ever want to sequence my genome, right? Like, and the reason is that you can actually learn so much about how your body works from your genome. So like one example was when I worked at this pharmacogenomics company, and if I tell you, it's like an immediate docs because they're like one of the biggest ones. They were in the early stages at the time, and what we would do on like a Friday is like the junior members of the team, they'd head down to the lab and say, all right, guys, like sequence our genome. Let's see what it says, right? And I remember when I got my genome sequenced, for the gene, it's called CYP1A2. So this gene codes for the proteins that metabolize things like coffee, right? Stimulants. Right. So if you think of stimulants, there's like a scale, right? At the very like extreme end of the spectrum, there's like speed. And then to the left of that, there's cocaine. And then to the left of that, there's like Adderall. And then to the left of that, there's like Red Bull. And then to the left of that, there's like a Coca-Cola, right? But these are all stimulants, right? The caffeine is also a stimulant. And my whole life, I lived thinking that I was extremely, extremely sensitive to caffeine. to the point that I would never have a coffee. And if I did ever have a Coca-Cola, it would have to be before noon, right? And the funny thing is that when I got my genome sequenced and I saw the results for the CYP1A2 gene, I'm actually an ultra rapid metabolizer. So that means my body, like, it has the proteins where it just like burns through caffeine and these stimulants like nothing, right? It just boom, 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 boom. So it's funny that in my head I was living my whole life thinking, oh, I can't have coffee, but my genome said the exact opposite. Like, hey, if you are going to have coffee, you're just going to burn through it. Like, it's going to, like, you're going to need more coffee to have the same effect as someone else. So that's just like one example, right? As we're going to have our genomes on our phones, we're going to want to know more about our body. Like, another example is there's like a gene, I think, for like long COVID. And if you fall into a certain category, you might want to know ahead of time, like, hey, if I catch COVID, I'll get, really, really severe, or no, not long COVID, like severity for COVID. And if you catch COVID, you might want to know, like, hey, if I catch this, it's going to be like really, really bad for me. And what determines that is, as Aldo mentioned, your genetics. Everyone has, different genetics, unless if you're a twin, right? Then things get a little bit interesting there. But you're going to want to know this stuff as we go forward. And I think what we're doing with GenomesDAO is allowing you to have self-custody of your genome. If you want to monetize it, you have that option. And you are getting paid, right? It's not the executives at 23andMe, right? At 23andMe, who do they answer to? They answer to shareholders. Who does GenomesDAO answer to? We answer to the DAO, right? And who owns the DAO? Hopefully the members of the community. So that's kind of how we've structured it. So I'll stop there.
No, that's wonderful. And thank you for the real world examples, because I think that certainly helps to make this topic a little bit more accessible. Let's talk about the future of GenomesDAO. Like, where is GenomesDAO now, I guess, in its plan, in its roadmap, and what can we expect of it into the future? Are there any other possible integrations into the Web3 ecosystem, that are being explored today?
Yeah, there are loads of things ongoing. So first of all, we're doing a weekly DAO meeting, to update all DAO holders of everything that is happening, because we really would like to stay close to them and want to make sure that everyone has their say. So our first step has already taken place, and I think this is also when we started talking. So I think, before I talk about that, let me first talk about kind of what we did, because we spent actually the best part of 3 years only working on the tech stack, right? We are proud that one of our very early stage investors is Consensus. And so we were part of their Tachyon cohorts. So that's kind of their early stage startup investor mechanism. And we worked closely with the Consensus team to develop our technology. And also we were proud to partner with the giant hardware company, micro devices company AMD, whose AMD SEV ES technology we use for building the vaults. So 3 years was basically spent on building this tech stack, because we really wanted to be sure that, if we're going to take on this big direct to consumer genetic companies, then we need to be sure that we have a technology that works and scales and kind of all of the above. So we only did our first steps to the outside world late 2020. And what we did in the very first instance is we did a campaign on Indiegogo, which is a kind of an early stage sales platform whereby you could say, hey, I have a great idea for a product, I'm launching it, but you can buy it off me now, accepting that you will receive it, not as kind of with a normal commercial platform, you will receive it in a few months, but you'll get it at a deeply discounted price, and you support us by doing that. And the reason why we did that is we just wanted to see what the market had to say towards, directly to consumers. And we're happy to say that we were sold out in an hour or so, kind of, of people who wanted to get into this. And already during our consensus time, we were talking about introducing a token. And we always had that on our agenda, but we did not want that to go at the expense of kind of the rest of the technology. So in 2021, we focused on developing the token, which is the gene as our utility token, and the Gnome as our governance token. And Intern can talk a little bit more about that. But I think end of November, we're proud to say that we opened with a token sale on sushi.com, through which we managed to sell our gene, the first batch of our genes at a value of around 424 ETH, giving us kind of also a good kickstart to further grow our operations. So that, and getting people in the DAO. Now, many people who've bought Gene are staking their Gene, getting Gnome for it, so becoming part of the DAO. Really joining us on the governance side of the DAO with us, and we're talking a lot to them. So that's where we are today. What we want to now do further, and we're already going to do something in mid-January, is to make sure that we can grow our infrastructure by getting more genomes vaulted. And the way we wanted to do it, hopefully very befitting the thinking of the Web 3.0 world, is an NFT project. And I'm going to let Intern talk a little bit about that NFT project, because we're very proud and also very excited about that.
Yeah. So I guess one thing I'll just really quickly go back to. So yeah, we have 2 tokens from our MISO sale. The first one is the Gene token, right? So that's like the native utility token of the platform. So think of this like ETH to Ethereum. If you want to buy, an NFT, you have to convert your $100 into ETH. And then that ETH you can use to buy like an NFT. And then the similar thing, like if you're on a flight from like US to Japan, and then you get off the flight, you want to buy soda, you have to, and you go and try to buy soda, they'll say, no, you have to convert your dollars to yen, because that's the native currency of the ecosystem. So the same thing applies here. The native currency of the GenomesDAO ecosystem, if pharma or you want to query your own vault, is that Gene token. So, if pharma says, "Oh, we're going to give you $50 to query this part of your genome," they convert that into Gene, so you get $50 worth of Gene. And then that also relates to the DeFi aspects of things, where we have our Gnome governance token, and the governance token, as with most governance token, that gives you like the voting power, the ability to write proposals, and it also in this kind of infrastructure, this brokering platform of genomic data, you own a share of that platform with the governance token. And the way you get that is if you stake that gene to earn, right? So that's kind of like the DeFi aspect of things. And then the gene token has like a $1 billion there's 1 billion gene tokens, and it has a deflationary aspect to it. So after like every kit we sell, we'll burn a certain amount of gene, and this would incentivize pharma researchers wanting to buy in early before it increases in value. So they get more queries, more bang for their buck if they get in early versus later. And then the Gnome token, which is the governance token, has a $10 million fixed cap. So that's kind of the tokenomics aspect of things. And then for our NFT sale, as I mentioned before, it's going to be 10,000 PFPs. There's going to be a different traits on some of them. So some of them will have maybe like a gold tier. Some of them will have different tiers. And then for some of them, you'll get, a Gene and Gnome airdrop. But all kits, all the NFTs, they're redeemable for like a real world good, which is this whole genome sequencing kit, right? And the reason why we picked like 10,000 is that, well, it just so happens that a lot of NFT projects, they're 10,000. But also for GenomesDAO, what in our conversations with pharma companies and researchers, they've told us that at the 10,000 genome threshold, that's when GenomesDAO data set looks really interesting to us. And that's when we'd want to potentially start querying, right? Yeah. So it's kind of, yeah. And for the NFTs, right? We're not like really making any money on the NFTs. We're basically just selling you like the kit and the vault. But what brings the value to the DAO is getting those genomes and vaults, right? So the larger we can grow this data set of people who have self custody of their genomes, the better it is for the DAO, and that's kind of how this thing scales and is capital efficient. I think one other thing you mentioned was how are you kind of incorporating with the Web3 community. So we are a DAO right now, but we're also working with other DAOs, right? This cross DAO collaboration. So like what we're doing now with BanklessDAO to help us kind of get the word out about the project. We work with Creator DAO. And then we're trying to work with some other DeFi DAOs, right? Or DeFi protocols, right? And one interesting thing we have in the pipeline is that kind of combining like crypto, DeFi, genomics to create kind of a UBI type system. And we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later. But when you're utilizing these money Legos, right, and you're utilizing kind of the products of different DAOs, you can create some extremely novel capital flows and capital systems that just would not be possible in like the meat space world. So we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later. But that's one of the really exciting things I think we have planned.
Great. Well, I would say as we're nearing the top of the hour here, is there anything we missed that you feel like we should talk about before we close out?
I think no. I mean, I always say, like, even if you don't really get the idea or don't like the idea of GenomesDAO, I always want to tell people, like, be aware that your DNA and your genomic sequence has value. So whatever you do, don't be too easy with waiving your data. Just like you, Humpty, said in the beginning, like, be conscious of your digital footprint. Also be conscious of, where you leave your genomic data and what other people can do with your genomic data if you are not careful. And that is always something that I would like, people to understand, that they're not so easy with going with direct to consumer genetic companies. And if they do, that they take the time to read the fine print about, what the degree of control is, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, we hope that you like us. And if you do, then you can join our Discord and, join the conversation. And we welcome you, every step of the way, and are happy to answer any questions you might have, and hope that of course you will become part of our DAO.
And that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you'd like to learn more about GenomesDAO, go to genomes.io and on Twitter @GenomesDAO. Thanks for listening to Crypto Sapiens. Please give us a follow, like, and a 5-star review wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next discussion.